Ya está a punto de transmitir.
Buenas tardes a todos.
Si vamos, tal vez si puedo ir por la doctora Alexandra. Ok, de hecho, yo aquí la jalo, ya está.
Muy buenas tardes, educadoras, educadores musicales. Muchas gracias por su presencia. Estamos muy emocionados, estamos muy contentos de contar con todos ustedes. Ahorita en unos segunditos estamos lanzando nuestra transmisión a YouTube. Comenzamos en unos minutos. Muchas gracias en verdad a todas, a todos por su presencia. Está entrando por ahí la maestra Andrea Rodríguez, nuestra invitada de Colombia. Buenas tardes a toda nuestra comunidad universitaria, a nuestros estudiantes, a los egresados, a nuestros profesores, a nuestras autoridades. Bienvenidos, muchas gracias por acompañarnos. Buenas tardes al doctor Rolando Ángel Alvarado de la Universidad Alberto Hurtado de Chile. Muchas gracias, doctor Rolando, por su presencia. Doctora Andrea Rodríguez de Colombia, bienvenida. Si gusta prender su camarita para saludarla. Buenas tardes. Qué gusto, qué placer contar con todos.
Buenas tardes, les damos la más cordial bienvenida a la inauguración del Foro Internacional de Educación Musical Veracruz 2021, FIEMV 2.5, que hemos titulado Resiliencia y Globalización en el contexto actual de la educación musical, el cual es organizado por el Cuerpo Académico Formación e Investigación en Educación Musical de la Facultad de Música de la Universidad Veracruzana. Ay, se me apagó mi computadora. Ari, si me suples un segundito.
Sí, claro que sí. Agradecemos mucho la presencia de todas y todos ustedes en este espacio. Agradecemos mucho a las autoridades que nos acompañan en esta mañana. Estamos aprendiendo como todos estas cuestiones virtuales. Estamos un poco nerviosos, así que les pedimos un poquitito de paciencia para comenzar formalmente nuestra inauguración. Agradecemos mucho también a las autoridades universitarias que nos acompañan esta tarde, a el maestro Álvaro Hernández Jarquín, director de la Facultad de Música de la Universidad Veracruzana, al doctor Miguel Flores Covarrubias, director del Área Académica de Artes, al doctor Mario Oliva, director de Relaciones Internacionales de la Universidad Veracruzana, y a la doctora Liliana Betancourt, representante coordinadora de la Dirección de Desarrollo Académico. En unos minutitos comenzamos. Si quieres, maestra Julieta, voy dando la bienvenida.
Sí, ya estuvo.
Perfecto.
Aquí estamos, sí. Perdón, es que se me trabó mi computadora. Les decía, en este foro de educación musical que organizamos en coordinación con la Asociación Civil Mateo Oliva, y para iniciar retomo un breve fragmento de un soneto de Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Para el alma no hay encierro ni prisiones que la impidan, porque solo la aprisionan las que se forma ella misma. Y es así como en esta ocasión las actividades se desarrollarán en línea a través de la plataforma Zoom y con transmisión parcial a través del canal Cuerpo Académico FIEMV V514, con el mismo entusiasmo que en 2019 y 2020 damos continuidad a este espacio artístico académico de reflexión y actualización, tanto para la comunidad de la Facultad de Música como las personas que nos acompañan de otras latitudes. Damos la bienvenida a las autoridades que nos acompañan el día de hoy. En el presidium, el doctor Mario Oliva Suárez, director general de Relaciones Internacionales, a la doctora Liliana Ivonne Betancourt Trevedan, directora general de Desarrollo Académico e Innovación Educativa, al doctor Miguel Flores Covarrubias, director general del Área Académica de Artes, maestro Álvaro Hernández Jarquín, director de la Facultad de Música, maestro Javier Castro Salgado, secretario de la Facultad de Música, a la maestra Laura Jaime Barrientos, directora de Actividades Artísticas de la Secretaría de Educación, y a la licenciada Natalia Tarquiño Sánchez, subdirectora académica del Instituto Superior de Música del Estado de Veracruz, en representación del maestro Cuthberto Córdoba Nieto, director general, y quien, por cierto, hizo una movilidad en nuestra universidad hace poco tiempo. A continuación, escucharemos a la maestra Rosarisbe Martínez Cabrera, coordinadora del Foro Internacional de Educación Musical Veracruz 2021, quien nos dirigirá un mensaje de bienvenida.
Muchas gracias, maestra Julieta. Buenas tardes, colegas educadoras y educadores musicales de diversas latitudes del mundo. Es un placer para mí darles la bienvenida a la emisión 2021 del Foro Internacional de Educación Musical Veracruz, en esta ocasión en formato virtual. Agradecemos el interés y su presencia. Cada nombre que vemos en todos esos cuadritos significa mucho para nosotros. Sabemos que atrás de ellos hay cuerpos alertas y corazones vibrando al unísono. La tecnología conjunta hoy a educadoras y educadores musicales de 26 estados de la República Mexicana, también de 13 países: Brasil, Cuba, Argentina, Venezuela, Guatemala, Colombia, Costa Rica, Chile, Nicaragua, Estados Unidos, Alemania, Honduras y El Salvador, teniendo un total de 250 personas inscritas. Sean bienvenidas todas y todos a este espacio de diálogo, comunicación y reflexión. Agradecemos la presencia de representantes de diversas universidades de México y otros países, a los representantes del FLADEM, Foro Latinoamericano de Educación Musical, y del FORMEDEM, Foro Mexicano de Educadores Musicales, con sus distintas filiales estatales, de la RELEM, Red Latinoamericana de Educación Musical, y de la ISME, la Sociedad Internacional de Educación Musical. Le damos la cordial bienvenida a los profesores de educación artística que laboran en educación básica y que día a día realizan una excelente labor con los niños, las niñas y los jóvenes de nuestro país. Nos da mucha emoción reencontrarnos con colegas que nos han acompañado en todas las emisiones del foro. a nuestra querida comunidad de la Facultad de Música y de otras entidades académicas de la Universidad Veracruzana, alumnas, alumnos, maestras, maestros egresados, este espacio es para ustedes. La hospitalidad de nuestro foro se traslada en esta ocasión a un formato virtual. Sin embargo, esperamos que se sientan acogidos como si estuviéramos en nuestras sedes de Jalapa y Naulinco. Muchas gracias a las profesoras y profesores invitados que aceptaron compartir su trabajo en este foro. Es un verdadero agasajo contar con ustedes. Sin más por el momento, les envío un abrazo fraterno.
Gracias. Escucharemos ahora al maestro Héctor Miguel Vázquez Córdoba, egresado de la Facultad de Música y director ejecutivo de la Asociación Civil Mateo Oliva Oliva, quien hará una presentación general del FIEMV, así como la bienvenida en inglés.
Buenas tardes, buenas noches, dependiendo del lugar donde nos estén sintonizando en este momento. Pues para la Asociación Civil Mateo Oliva Oliva es un gusto poder participar nuevamente en esta edición que se ha titulado FIEMV 2.5, en la cual, como ya se comentó, tenemos la participación de 26 estados de la República, 13 países, lo cual nos hace ver que este proyecto ha ido creciendo año con año y que aún a la distancia la comunidad se sigue fortaleciendo y creciendo, lo cual nos motiva al próximo año podernos, esperemos si todo va bien, vernos nuevamente en persona y poder compartir esa calidez humana que caracteriza y por lo cual este foro se ha hecho pues bastante, yo diría, famoso o bastante nutrido su participación en años anteriores por esa calidez que tenemos como personas, como veracruzanos, como personas que nos gusta recibir a quienes nos visitan y en particular a nuestra máxima casa de estudios, la Universidad Veracruzana. Y pues bueno, por atención a las personas que nos sintonizan en otras latitudes y que, bueno, el castellano no es una lengua que dominen, solamente una breve bienvenida. Hello everyone, we welcome you to the 2.5 edition of the FIEMV, which is an event that is happening currently it's hosted in Mexico. Nevertheless, due to the current pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, we are forced to move to this online setting, but we are more than happy to have you today, and we welcome you to be with us wherever you are broadcasting this conference. So welcome, and we're looking forward to have a meaningful conversation with all of you.
Muchas gracias. A continuación, escucharemos el mensaje del maestro Álvaro Hernández Jarquín, director de la Facultad de Música.
Muchas gracias, maestra Julieta. Buenos días a todos, todas. Con gusto saludo a todas las personas aquí reunidas, quienes son finalmente la razón de llevar a cabo estos esfuerzos. Bienvenidas a todas las autoridades que se encuentran con nosotros, doctor Miguel Flores, maestra Eileen, doctor Mario de Jesús Oliva, licenciada Guadalupe Soto, aquí en representación de la maestra Laura Jaime, maestra Natalia Tarquino, muchas gracias por estar aquí. También agradezco a la doctora Sara Ladrón Guevara, rectora de nuestra universidad, y a la doctora María Magdalena Hernández Alarcón, secretaria académica, quienes no pudieron estar presentes el día de hoy en este momento, pero se mantienen siempre al tanto de todos los eventos académicos y artísticos de nuestra facultad. Es para mí un gusto formar parte de la Facultad de Música y contar en nuestra entidad con el cuerpo académico Formación e Investigación en Educación Musical, formado por 3 maestras a partir de nuestro entorno social, que actualmente no se limita a nuestro espacio físico, integrado por estudiantes, maestros, autoridades, egresados, conocidos que se desempeñan en el campo de la educación musical, en todas las vertientes que esto implica, con el objetivo de desarrollar nuestros constructos, paradigmas y visiones de lo que implica educar para la música, en la música y a través de la música. Es de recalcar la capacidad de organización, creatividad y orientación al trabajo en equipo de este cuerpo académico y sus colaboradores al realizar eventos desde antes y durante la pandemia, investigaciones y colaboraciones con colegas de diferentes latitudes y representantes de otras instituciones. Muchas gracias también a Héctor Vázquez por la colaboración que siempre ha tenido con el cuerpo académico. Él, como egresado de esta facultad, siempre se ha mantenido en constante comunicación y colaboración. Este trabajo comenzó con el primer Foro Internacional de Educación Musical en 2019 y a la fecha hemos contado con más de 1000 personas colaborando y participando a través de estas 3 ediciones realizadas, provenientes de todo el país y con autoridades en la materia como la doctora Ana Lucía Frega, el doctor Guillermo Rosaba Coto, la doctora Hildegard Fröhlich, la doctora Rosalía Trejo, el doctor Job Baker, por nombrar algunos, y las autoridades que presenciaremos en estos 2 días intensos de trabajo, la doctora Alexandra Kertz-Welzel, de nuevo el doctor Guillermo Rosaba Coto, con quien hemos estado colaborando activamente durante todo el periodo, y los periodos ha sido incluso jurado de exámenes de titulación en nuestra facultad. El maestro Miguel Ángel Villanueva, la maestra Mayra Patiña, las doctoras Miriam Ruiz y Andrea Rodríguez. Tenemos un elenco de lujo y esperamos que lo disfruten mucho. Este será un gran evento y estaremos listos para aprender de él y seguir construyendo relaciones de colaboración con nuestros colegas de otros puntos del planeta y de aquí mismo, en pro de continuar el debate y mejoramiento de la educación musical. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, maestro. Y cedo ahora la palabra al doctor Miguel Flores Covarrubias, director general del área académica de artes, quien realizará la inauguración oficial en representación de la secretaria académica, doctora María Magdalena Hernández Alarcón. Adelante.
Muchas gracias, muy buenas tardes a todos. Me da muchísimo gusto encontrarme con ustedes gracias al esfuerzo del cuerpo académico de formación e investigación en educación musical, que no dejaron que se les aprisionara el alma y pensaron cómo hacer para que nos encontráramos y aprovecharon este espacio precisamente para que se reúnan, reflexionen y compartan experiencias en la educación musical y sobre todo compartan las experiencias de resiliencia, las experiencias de resistencia ante un fenómeno que a todo el mundo nos obligó a encerrarnos, pero no por eso a aislarnos. Entonces, me da mucho gusto el esfuerzo que está haciendo el cuerpo académico, el trabajo excelente que están haciendo Erika, Julieta y Arisbe, las felicito por ello, obviamente siempre con el apoyo de su director, el maestro Álvaro Hernández Jarquín, y también agradezco muchísimo que nos acompañen áreas importantes de la universidad, como el doctor Mario Oliva Suárez, director de Relaciones Internacionales, la maestra Liliana Betancourt Trevedan, de la Dirección General de Desarrollo Académico, que siempre da seguimiento precisamente a las actividades de cuerpos académicos, y bueno, y a todos los invitados, Héctor Vázquez Córdoba, de la Asociación Mateo Oliva, que también ha estado muy vinculado con los esfuerzos que se hacen en este foro, y también me da muchísimo gusto, como ya lo dijo Arisbe, que esto es algo muy emotivo a pesar de la frialdad de la tecnología. En cada cuadrito, yo me estuve dando una vuelta ya por todas las demás páginas, se encuentra mucha gente conocida, muchos compañeros de generación, muchos alumnos que están ahorita conectados en este foro, que tienen la oportunidad, a pesar de la distancia, de reencontrarse con su facultad de música, y a todos los invitados también que van a compartir con nosotros mucha experiencia y del que todos yo creo que saldremos enriquecidos. Entonces me da muchísimo gusto poder atestiguar que no nos aprisionamos, que seguimos aquí, que seguimos creativos, que seguimos vigentes y resistiendo, porque sí es una situación que después de un año sí nos va pasando factura esta distancia, sí hace falta esta cercanía, pero no nos dejamos derrotar y seguimos aquí en esta comunicación muy humana, muy sensible de la experiencia de ser educadores musicales. Entonces, los felicito a todos por seguir resilientes, por seguir fuertes en este empeño de llevar la educación musical a mejores estados de desarrollo.
Sí, bueno, ya está dando la que...
Y sin más preámbulo, es un honor para mí, en representación de ambas, de nuestra secretaria académica, la doctora María Magdalena Hernández Alarcón, y de nuestra rectora, la doctora Sara Ladrón de Guevara, dar por inaugurado los trabajos de este foro 2.5, supongo que por agarrarnos al intermedio, este foro 2.5 de Educación Musical Veracruz 2021, siendo las 13:11 horas de este día, viernes 26 de marzo. Enhorabuena a todos, seguramente será un éxito y les deseamos lo mejor a la distancia y esperando, como ya lo dijeron también ustedes, que el año próximo ya nos podamos encontrar y ya nos podamos también sobre todo abrazar. Un abrazo a todos y felicidades.
Muchas gracias, doctor. Y para cerrar con broche de oro esta inauguración, escucharemos la participación musical a cargo de 2 estudiantes de la Licenciatura en Educación Musical, Alicia, Navarrete, Landa y Yolotzin, Campos, Loyo. Es un breve video, sin embargo, ellas lo prepararon especialmente para esta inauguración. Adelante.
Bienvenidos al Foro Internacional de Educación Musical Veracruz FIEMV 2021, edición 2.5. A continuación, presentaré un dúo de arpas conformado por Yolotzin Campos y su servidora Alicia Navarrete. Interpretaremos un son jarocho representativo del estado de Veracruz. Este es el zapateado jarocho para todos ustedes.
Muchísimas gracias a Alicia Navarrete, Landa y a Yolotzin Campos, Loyo, por este video que prepararon especialmente para la inauguración. Y con esto concluimos la ceremonia virtual de inauguración de nuestro Foro Internacional de Educación Musical Veracruz 2021. Agradecemos a las autoridades que nos acompañaron, el que nos hayan hecho un espacio en su agenda para estar en este momento. Pueden ustedes retirarse o bien quedarse, están cordialmente invitados al resto de las actividades. En el momento que ustedes puedan, con esta misma liga que ahora les enviamos pueden acceder. Y pues con esto terminamos y damos paso ahora a la conferencia magistral que dará la doctora Alexandra Kertz. Para eso cedo la palabra al doctor Héctor Miguel Vázquez Córdoba. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, ahora es un placer presentar a nuestra, la persona que dará la conferencia magistral en esta edición 2.5 del FIEMV. Es una investigadora con mucho prestigio. Le pediré a algunos de los compañeros que están a cargo del chat si por favor pueden compartir el link para poder acceder a la presentación en PowerPoint. Entonces, para que la gente que quiera conocer más a fondo la biografía de la doctora Alexandra Kertz-Welzel la pueda conocer y la pueda acceder a ella. Solamente mencionar que la profesora es directora del Departamento de Educación Musical en la Ludwig-Maximilians Universität en Múnich, en Alemania, y es una reconocidísima catedrática e investigadora con diversas publicaciones, libros y la verdad cosas de un gran prestigio en lo que la educación musical respecta, y estamos súper contentos y somos muy afortunados de que haya accedido a participar en esta edición. Y también como un poco como de adelanto, si todo va bien, esperemos, el próximo año ella estará en México, estará en la parte presencial, pero eso queremos que sea justamente un hilo, ¿no?, conductor que nos lleve de ahora a lo que esperemos sea volver a lo que ahora llamamos como la antigua realidad, ¿no?, que esperemos sea una realidad mejor de la que ahora estamos viviendo. Pero sin más preámbulo, también quiero comentar que nuestra compañera Eileen nos estará apoyando con lo que es la cuestión de traducción, y va a aparecer un subtítulo. Ustedes van a poder leer en la parte de abajo el subtítulo de algunas de las partes de lo que la doctora Alexandra irá presentando. Esto ya que ella va a ir comentando la presentación, es decir, no hay un escrito. Es decir, lo que la doctora Alexandra va a ir comentando no está escrito, sino ella lo va a ir narrando, y conforme ella lo vaya narrando, y al no tenerlo escrito, entonces en este caso Eileen irá tratando de traducir sobre todo las ideas principales. No será una traducción literal, puesto que sería muy complicado hacerlo en tiempo real, pero sí va a tratar de dar un contexto de lo que ella va comentando, y también tenemos las diapositivas en PowerPoint en español para quien guste pueda complementar lo que escucha, lo que lee en el PowerPoint y con los subtítulos que irán apareciendo en la parte de abajo. Como ustedes saben, estamos probando, esto será una nueva modalidad, pero bueno, esperamos contar con su participación a lo largo del foro, e iniciamos con esta conferencia magistral. So, Dr. Kertz, you can start now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Héctor, and your team. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation to start this conference with some ideas about internationalization and the COVID-19 pandemic. All of us would wish to be together and to share our ideas at the same place, but we are not. And so I think it's important to do the best out of what is currently possible. And my research in recent years has been a lot about internationalization and how we can become a culturally sensitive global music education community. And I would like to share some ideas of this research and my book Globalizing Music Education with you today, and to see how the COVID-19 pandemic changed this and how the future could look like and what we can do, how we can change and shape the future. So I would like to share my screen so that you see the Spanish PowerPoint. And I'm sorry that I don't speak Spanish, but I might start learning it so at some point. Okay. In recent years, internationalization has become an important topic, even though it is not unproblematic. While a global perspective facilitates improving music education theory, practice, and advocacy, the dominance of Anglo-American music education threatens the global diversity of music education. Therefore, a culturally sensitive internationalization of music education, aiming at the formation of a united yet diverse global music education community, is crucial. While there have been attempts to support this endeavor, the COVID-19 pandemic has raised new issues regarding internationalization. On one hand, the pandemic shows how vulnerable we are due to our global connectedness, including the concerns music educators share internationally. On the other hand, the pandemic leads to new ways of transnational collaboration, for instance, through online presentations or conferences. There are online platforms and online communication systems available which create an international space where the ambivalence of connectedness and distance appears in a new light. To a certain degree, music education has become more international due to the pandemic and the easy accessibility of global online spaces. At the same time, we are further away from each other than ever before, with closed borders, cancelled conferences, and a new online reality which questions the value of personal encounters in the real world. Thus, the COVID-19 pandemic shows new aspects of internationalization in music education, which we will have to take into account in future concepts and visions of global music education. The questions I would like to answer with my presentation today is, what is internationalization in general and with regard to music education? How did the pandemic change internationalization regarding music education? And how will the global music education community look in the future? These questions do not only concern the level of higher educational research, but also music education in classrooms. Internationalization affects different levels of society and music education. And it certainly affects our personal and professional identities as musicians, music educators, and scholars. In this presentation, I'm interested in our notions of internationalization, how we could reconceptualize our profession from a global perspective, working towards a culturally sensitive internationalization of music education, and how this might have changed through the COVID-19 pandemic. This is what I'm going to talk about. First, I would like to talk about internationalization and music education. Then about the global music education community and possible concepts which we could use to better understand how a culturally sensitive globalization of music education and a culturally sensitive community could look like. Then the impact the pandemic had on music education and internationalization, and finally, new visions for a new world. Let's start. All of us have certainly a notion of what internationalization is. It means going beyond what we know. It means encountering the foreign. It might mean learning something new. It might be about peace and intercultural understanding, or about global success in research or university rankings. But likewise, and this is often forgotten, internationalization is about issues of hegemony and power. Although these ideas have often been connected to globalization. In research, there often is a differentiation between internationalization and globalization. Internationalization being seen as positive, as something like, quote, the white knight of higher education, or intercultural understanding, while globalization is associated with many aspects such as exploitation, proxy wars, refugees, and environmental problems. Internationalization seems to represent positive ideals and might stand for transnational understanding and high quality of higher education. Brandenburg and de Witt state, and you see this in this slide, I read it in English, internationalization is claimed to be the last stand for humanistic ideas against the world of pure economic benefits, allegedly represented by the term globalization. While this statement by Brandenburg and de Witt is related to higher education, it likewise tells something general about internationalization by differentiating between globalization and internationalization. However, it presents a rather one-sided understanding of both concepts. One is good and the other one is bad. But internationalization and globalization can certainly overlap, replace each other, respond to or compete with each other. It is too simple to claim one to be good and the other one to be bad. Certainly very much depends on how both terms are defined. In my book, Globalizing Music Education, I try to redefine what globalizing could mean regarding the notion of a culturally sensitive globalization of music education. In this presentation, I will further explain what this means, also in view of the pandemic. It might be too easy to claim that internationalization is free of issues of power. However, general definitions of internationalization do usually not raise the issue of power and hegemony. They are rather based on the notion of nation states and aiming at connecting various countries and their respective institutions when describing internationalization. Internationalization is a common term in political science and governmental relations, indicating the goal of connecting beyond borders. Internationalization is also used in the business world, first concerning software that can easily be adapted to the needs of other countries, and second, to describe initiatives going beyond national borders. But when we take a closer look at internationalization, it becomes clear, as Van der Oor states, that, quote, internationalization practices are not value neutral and cannot be devoid of cultural dimensions, end of quote. Most often they are related to ideas from English-speaking countries or Western Europe, often marginalizing knowledge and concepts from other parts of the world. Van der Oor says, quote, the work of internationalization is complex, multifaceted, and fraught with power relations, end of quote. This is something which is often overlooked, especially when we take a look at internationalization in higher education and how universities work together, which academic culture dominates, which language is spoken, which model of a university. So we need to be much more sensitive regarding these power relations, because internationalization is clearly not free of these issues. Since 2007, there is an intense discussion in studies in higher education about what internationalization could mean. It culminated in this definition in 2015 by De Witt and Hunter, describing what internationalization is, at least regarding higher education. This means internationalization in this understanding regarding universities and higher education affects the structure of universities. It is not only something superficial. It's opening them for different models of research and teaching, including intercultural understanding. Internationalization regarding higher education and universities should be an intentional process with a clear purpose and consciously shaped by the goal to enhance the quality of education and research for all students and staff. And internationalization should be connected to universities' responsibility for the society, particularly regarding the need to address diversity, but also nurturing cultural identity. This indicates that internationalization is certainly a dialectical concept, raising the issue of national and local educational culture, in view of being open for the global, for instance, regarding the academic culture. And certainly internationalization is not easily accomplished. It's connected to significant changes and most often confused with Americanization. This indicates that internationalization is clearly not a neutral term, or free of issues of power and hegemony. Most often, internationalization is about knowledge from the North, English-speaking countries, or Western Europe. Van der Oor states, quote, internationalization involves knowledge exchange and transfer. However, the current practice is to privilege a form of knowledge originating from the North and flowing to the South. It is important that knowledge flows be multidirectional. Knowledge generation and dissemination need to be decolonized, end of quote. This indicates that there is a need for being more critical regarding internationalization if it implies the dominance of Western knowledge and concepts and its relation to decolonization. Internationalization should indeed be an open exchange process in terms of learning from each other. Knowledge produced in certain parts of the world, such as North America or Europe, should not be privileged. We need a critical self-examination of what the foundation of various fields of research is and which new narratives or perspectives would be necessary in times of globalization and internationalization. This certainly concerns music education, where the dominance of Anglo-American standards in international music education, theory and practice, including research, still prevails, mostly without being critically discussed. In view of the further formation of the global music education community, we need to critically address these issues. Internationalizing music education has been a recurring topic in research, but it is not really clear what it means. Does it mean just information about music education in various countries, such about music education in China, what's going on in classrooms? Does it mean learning from each other, whoever has the best approach of learning how to sing? Or does it mean transnational collaborations? Marie McCarthy states that internationalization could mean reconsidering what connects music educators globally. She states, quote, music educators worldwide are united by a common purpose, to engage children and youth in music and to develop their artistic life and their humanity, end of quote. This indicates that music educators worldwide have similar ideas, intentions, and motivations. Maybe there also are similar rationales for music education in public schools worldwide, such as patriotism or religion. Furthermore, McCarthy refers to the fact that music educators worldwide share similar challenges. In public schools at least, and I think also outside of public schools. These concern the status of music education in schools. Even though music education is sometimes a mandatory subject, most often it has a fragile status, is most often an elective or extracurricular activity. And even if it is mandatory, there are often not enough teachers or enough possibilities to teach it. Another challenge music educators face worldwide is music education advocacy. It's a global concern. We have to permanently justify what we do and that we are a significant part of the public school curriculum. Furthermore, curriculum development and reform is a global concern of music educators. It questions how to improve the curriculum and how to deal with neoliberal educational philosophies such as the standards movement. Music educators globally are also confronted with the question whose music should be presented in the curriculum. This raises awareness for culturally responsive teaching in terms of critically selecting the musical content of lessons. Music educators globally share also the concern of a changing culture of pedagogy, of including ways of informal learning, and how we could do that and connect that to the music education classroom. Finally, what we share globally are professional networks and forums for research. All of us are united and need to work on promoting our courses in music education globally. If you take a look at internationalization and music education, there has been one traditional approach, and this was comparative music education. We would see what's going on in one country and compare it with what's going on in another country. But in my book, Globalizing Music Education, I say that this is not possible anymore because we are already international. There have been many global exchange processes going on. And so we need a different model which helps us better to understand what has been going on and how things look today and how maybe we can change various kinds of things. In my book, I develop a framework which aims at facilitating a culturally sensitive internationalization of music education. A framework offers a theoretical structure of categories and conceptual elements which can facilitate becoming a united and diverse global music education community. A conceptual framework functions like a researcher's map of the territory investigated. It offers a specific lens for scrutinizing a topic such as internationalization by presenting specific analytical categories against conceptual elements which arise from research findings in respective fields and can lead to new insights. It functions as a tool to evaluate and shape globalizing music education in a culturally sensitive way, no matter if in general or in a specific country. The analytical categories can be used as guides for assessing or improving the current state of internationalization in music education. By providing these categories, the conceptual framework breaks down the complexity of internationalization into selected aspects that are easily accessible and can be applied to different concepts. The framework raises awareness for various dimensions of internationalization, such as educational transfer, global knowledge production, or the global mindset. By questioning the current state of, for instance, global exchange processes or global knowledge production, it offers a new way of approaching and understanding international music education. This means the framework helps to find questions which evaluate and assess our current state of internationalization in certain parts of music education. This could mean in research, where we could ask questions such as, what are important topics in global music education? Who are significant scholars? Do they represent the global or Anglo-American music education? Is there research about internationalizations and its problems in certain contexts? Or regarding music education policy, we could ask, which university model is implemented, the American, the British, or the German one? What role does educational transfer play in higher education and regarding music education in schools? I would like to take a look at three selected categories of the framework I present. And this is educational transfer, global knowledge production, and the global mindset. They offer perspectives on global music education, thereby facilitating a culturally sensitive internationalization of music education. Let's start with educational transfer. I already mentioned that comparative music education is not appropriate anymore in times of global exchange processes and internationalization, because comparing is always a problem. Comparative music education often implied that the focus is on Anglo-American countries and Western Europe as role models with which other countries have to be compared. And comparative music education did not pay enough attention to global exchange processes, which have been going on for a long time and which make it difficult to compare, because we are already international. And if we already exchange different models over centuries, it might be difficult to understand or difficult to compare. So I propose that a new approach in international music education instead of comparative music education would, for instance, be tracing and mapping educational transfer. Educational transfer describes copying a successful educational strategy or policy from one country and implementing it in another country. This has been going on for centuries. Educational travelers went to different countries looking for superior education methods, such as going to Switzerland in 19th century or to Germany to learn from what was going on in music education classrooms. The ORF approach is a famous example for educational transfer, being something which works all over the world while being reduced to basic principles which can be adapted to different concepts. However, educational transfer has not always been free of issues of power, as processes of educational transfer in colonial contexts exemplify. For instance, regarding colonial powers forcing their school systems upon their colonies, such in Latin America during the last centuries. English researcher David Phillips developed the so-called Oxford models to describe the various stages and circumstances of educational transfer. The spectrum model analyzes particularly different ways of educational transfer, such as imposed or required under constraint. This approach can help better understand how systems of music education worldwide emerged and what role hegemony and power played regarding educational transfer, including how to possibly decolonize certain music education systems. But aside from colonial issues, educational transfer often supports neoliberal educational philosophies of schooling, for instance, regarding the standards movement. International student assessment programs such as PISA require less successful countries to copy strategies or policies from successful ones. This includes the problems of educational transfer, such as using it as a cut and paste solution, only copying successful strategies to be used in another country, but without changing or adapting them. So I would argue that we need to understand educational transfer, which countries exchanged or transferred their models of schooling or music education to other countries, to better understand how international music education worked. It's not only about comparison, it's rather about issues of hegemony and power and about understanding how we exchanged our models or who was forced to take over a certain model of music education. Let's move on to global knowledge production, which is another category of the framework for globalizing music education I present. What kind of knowledge is thought of as global knowledge is a significant issue in each field of research. The process in which global knowledge is turned into local knowledge is turned into global knowledge is of interest for all. Highland refers to the Enlightenment as one example for the most successful transformation of local knowledge into global one. Knowledge originally connected to Western Europe in the 17th or 18th century was declared as global. Hall might be right that global knowledge is most often the way a dominant culture represents itself. Marie McCarthy underlines this fact by stating that, quote, international perspectives in music education are founded on and dominated by narratives from Western countries, and those influenced by the colonial presence of European countries, end of quote. This is indeed correct. The most significant publications worldwide, most presenters at international conferences, or involved in international organizations are certainly from the Anglo-American music education world. Geographical, geolinguistic, and geopolitical aspects have an important impact on knowledge production in music education worldwide. It sometimes seems that knowledge from Anglo-American or Western European countries is more relevant and is easily declared as global knowledge, because our standard ideas and models in international music education have their origin precisely in this tradition. This also concerns peer review, where in international music education, standards of good writing in English function as an international point of reference and a criterion for acceptance. This can cause problems for non-native English-speaking authors, even if their English language abilities might be good. The problem is often not a grammatical one, but rather a rhetorical one, because, as sociolinguistic research indicates, rhetoric varies across culture, even in academic contexts. And you see this quotation here from Finnish scholars who criticize that we should not accept the Anglo-American or the English way of writing, but be rather more sensitive, culturally sensitive regarding different kinds of rhetorics and rhetorical choices. And that we just learn to understand that there is not only an American or an English standard. And it's also important to distinguish between clarity of thinking and different rhetorical choices, because sociolinguistics has for some time analyzed these kinds of problems. And it's important that we take this into account when we consider the global music education community. The last category I would like to refer to regarding the framework is the global mindset. The global mindset describes the knowledge and abilities culturally sensitive people possess. It means being open towards cultural diversity and to effectively communicate across cultures. This includes being comfortable with cultural misunderstandings and conflicts, having the ability to reconcile opposite positions, being culturally responsive and flexible. The global mindset encompasses three different capitals: the psychological, intellectual, and the social one. Regarding the psychological capital, attributes such as curiosity, openness to new experiences, or cognitive flexibility are important. This likewise concerns being able to have a variety of perspectives on a situation, finding creative solutions, respecting the values of different cultural contexts. Intellectual capital concerns having knowledge of various cultures, of globalization, of different fields such as music education from international perspective. The social capital of the global mindset describes the significance of relationships and networks for global success, to be an active member of the global music education community. Gaining the different capitals of the global mindset requires personal transformations, which might not be easily accomplished. But we desperately need the global mindset to overcome international music education, which is still dominated by Anglo-American or Western European ideas. Educational transfer, global knowledge production, and the global mindset are significant aspects of the framework I present, facilitating globalizing music education in a culturally sensitive way. Now, I talked about the formation of the global music education community. And it might be time to think what community is and how the global music education community should look like. This is a rather sociological concept to understand what community is and how we should look at as a global music education community. And there certainly is no need to be dominated by one music education or research culture, because concepts in sociology suggest that it's possible to be united by shared beliefs, but at the same time being characterized by diversity. To facilitate the formation of the global music education community as united yet diverse, it's important to take a look at various concepts which could support this development. Community usually describes a group of people who have something in common. They are united by specific values and ideas. In a more traditional sense, locality and language played an important role for connecting people. Today, in view of globalization, communities are more flexible, but also fragile, often not bound to a specific place or language. Community has become a versatile concept. Music educators worldwide would certainly qualify as a community. They share the same purpose regarding engaging people in music, supporting their musical learning. They face similar challenges regarding music education as a school subject, as we heard before. They have joint visions of what music education should accomplish, for instance, regarding social change. And English certainly is the common language in international music education. I would like to refer to 3 different concepts of community which could be applied to the global music education community: symbolic, cosmopolitan, and imagined. The global music education community could certainly be a symbolic community, characterized by shared practices, values, and beliefs. They create a sense of belonging. To be a member in a symbolic community, such as the global music education community, identity formation is crucial, which can happen in different ways. Hildegard Fröhlich states that, quote, diversity can be shared and celebrated best if a sense of belonging has been established, end of quote. Shared basic beliefs provide strong foundations for the global music education community, while it is enriched by a multiplicity of opinions and perspectives. But the global music education community could certainly also be a cosmopolitan community. This exemplifies the close connection between the local and the global, a diversity of perspectives and worldviews which is united by basic beliefs. Cosmopolitan communities seem to rehabilitate the notion of community in a way appropriate in view of globalization. They are particularly communicatively constructed in discourses. Finally, the global music education community could also be an imagined community, referring to Benedict Anderson's famous concept of imagined, which describes that the members of a community do not have to know each other, because even in the smallest nation, this is not happening. All the members of the global music education community can certainly not know each other. Only some might know specific persons who they met at conferences. But still we are a community united by shared ideas, but also diverse in many other respects. The considerations about internationalization and the global music education community so far represent the current state of research. Now it will be interesting to think about what the COVID-19 pandemic changed regarding these concepts, and what this means for us being a global music education community, what it means for internationalization, and for our personal and professional identities. We all know what the COVID-19 pandemic is, and we all know its impacts on our personal and professional lives. It does not only threaten our health, but it has changed our entire lives as musicians, educators, and scholars, forcing us to adapt to a new normal, consisting of distancing, reduction of personal contacts, closure of schools, and cancelling of all cultural activities. But aside from threatening our livelihood, the pandemic has likewise taught us a lot about our societies, uncovering what truly matters. Politicians and scientists told us that musicians and music educators are not system relevant because no one needs music or music education to survive. An example for this is the massive reduction of music education or even elimination from the school curriculum in many countries around the world. For instance, in the United Kingdom. 10% of elementary and secondary schools have not been teaching music at all during the pandemic. Even if music education was happening, many British schools have reduced it. Extracurricular music activities are no longer taking place in 72% of elementary schools and 66% of secondary schools in the UK. These numbers from the UK might not be so different from what has happened in other countries. It clearly shows what our societies value when facing an emergency, still seeing the arts, music and music education as a luxury, even though it is a necessity, because the arts give meaning to life. They represent life's essence in paintings, poems or songs. I sometimes wonder how politicians could completely ignore the long history of aesthetics, psychology and philosophy of art. As human beings, we need more than food and shelter. We need meaning in life, which the arts offer. Authors such as economist Amartya Sen or philosopher Martha Nussbaum emphasize that we need indeed more than food for surviving, underlining the significance of freedom and everybody's right to human flourishing. And the arts and music play a significant role to make life meaningful. Reconsidering their ideas and the ideas of many more authors could lead to a new appreciation of the arts and music in society, including music education. This indicates that we need a new discourse about what is important for our societies. And as musicians, music educators and scholars, we need to have a strong voice in these discussions. However, to better understand the impact the pandemic has on music education and internationalization, it is important to decide how we understand the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you can see on the slide, I make 3 suggestions regarding how we can understand the pandemic. We can understand it as illness, as unprecedented event, or from a sociological perspective, as traumatic social change. Understanding the COVID-19 pandemic as illness, such as the Spanish flu, would mean that we have some experiences and many documents about how people dealt with illnesses, such as the Spanish flu 100 years ago. And we never thought that we might face a similar situation. We can certainly learn from it, the changes it caused in society 100 years ago. But there will be similarities and differences to our current situation. Another way of understanding the COVID-19 pandemic would be an unprecedented event, something completely new, confronting us with challenges we have never experienced before in culture and education. This would put us in the situation of encountering something human beings never experienced before. To a certain degree, this might be true, since the COVID-19 pandemic is certainly not the Spanish flu, and our society is completely different than 100 years ago. But at the same time, it is clear that it is not unprecedented, but that we rather experience something which others have experienced before, even though the exact circumstances might not be the same. Understanding the COVID-19 pandemic as traumatic social change would mean to take a sociological perspective. This would be my favorite option, actually. If the pandemic is understood as traumatic social change, this means it threatens our former way of living, our culture and identity. Sociologist Roxane de la Savonnière defines social change as, quote, a situation where rapid events lead to a profound societal transformation and produces a rupture in the equilibrium of the social and normative structure, end of quote. Deep changes in society happen fast and lead to reconceptualization of norms and values, since old ways of thinking and acting do not work anymore. The COVID-19 pandemic certainly caused dramatic social change, reconceptualizing individual rights and democratic freedom, likewise leading to a new understanding of what social life and taking care of each other means. Dramatic social change is certainly a threat to a society and individuals, forcing us to rethink what has so far been taken for granted. Understanding the COVID-19 pandemic as dramatic social change would mean that our societies and music education can never be as they were before. The old ways have been changed forever, and there needs to be a new equilibrium in society. Regarding music education, this means that some aspects of the new situation, for instance, online teaching, online recitals or conferences, might continue, but not as only means. Research about COVID-19 and its impact on the arts and music education show similar effects, even though research is still in its beginning, for instance, regarding the community arts sector. It shows that the pandemic can be understood as destructive disruption, but also in a positive way as reflective disruption, leading us to a new way of conceptualizing who we are. It helps likewise to uncover hidden beliefs of who we are or what the society does. There are new discursive frames, for instance, regarding fragility, resilience, revolution or love. And we should not forget that not only COVID-19 threatens our lives, but that there are many injustices in our society which the pandemic only uncovers. It shows our fundamental vulnerability as artists, musicians, and music educators, and questions how we can navigate in times of crisis. But the pandemic is not only seen as something devastating, rather it is also an opportunity for reimagining who we are and who we want to be as individuals and as music education profession. It might even lead to organizational changes caused through the pandemic, for instance through new forms of leadership or growth mindset. Theories of change and organizational change likewise point out the different phases when being confronted with a crisis such as the pandemic. From the comfort zone to learning, panic zones to corridors which lead to opportunities, for instance, in community arts organizations. The pandemic certainly leads to a revised and maybe new meaning of internationalization. It presents the paradox that we are much better connected, much more international and global due to technology, but at the same time further away from each other than ever. I would like to highlight some aspects of this development regarding the opportunities and challenges it presents. First, internationalization and online or remote teaching. We are globally connected through online communication technology, both in music education classrooms around the world and in higher education. All of us have similar problems as music educators when we are confronted with remote teaching, even though some countries might do better. We certainly learned new ways of teaching and music making, and maybe we also learned a new appreciation of personal contacts and making music in the same room when we hopefully will return to our classrooms. Certainly international classes and presentations opened up new ways of understanding what being globally means. While presentations like the one I'm currently giving are globally accessible, it likewise presents the challenges we all know. We do not have personal contact, cannot communicate non-verbally, and I hope that Zoom fatigue might not be too deep. And it's not that easy to learn something more than just from words, or we cannot have a coffee break to talk in a relaxed context. But still we have a chance to meet and to exchange ideas. When applying the framework of globalizing music education I presented before, aiming at a culturally sensitive internationalization where the pandemic plays a role, we could ask, for instance, the following questions regarding the current state of internationalization. Do online events connect us better? Do they support a culturally sensitive internationalization of music education? Which language dominates? Is research from certain parts of the world favored? How can more voices be included to shape internationalization in a new way? Certainly, higher education and research is also affected. There's a new understanding of international cooperation and mobility, and we have to ask ourselves when we have to travel in the future and when not. So we really have to understand and differentiate when it might be necessary to meet in person and when not. And also when we are in the global music education classroom or on online seminars, the interesting question, so what happened right now? My presentation was gone. Strange. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, because somehow my presentation was gone and something else is here. So I try again to go back to the presentation.
Yes, we can see now your PowerPoint there.
Sorry. Now we can really experience what the problems of online teaching and being connected online are while I'm talking about. All right, so I was talking about academic culture, and even if we are in a global online music education classroom, we should ask the questions the framework suggests. For instance, which academic culture dominates? Do we use the technological opportunities we have to make room for different teaching and research cultures? And we should be aware of the fact that even though if we are in a global online space, this online space is not free of issues of power, like I mentioned at the beginning regarding internationalization. We still have to be careful, and we still have to consider what is going on. And having a translation into Spanish and a German speaking English and having a global audience is certainly an excellent attempt and excellent support for globalizing music education in a culturally sensitive way. This strengthens our feeling of being a global music education community, being online and connected. And we certainly face similar challenges and opportunities. And we have to ask what kind of global music education community we would like to be in times of COVID-19. Certainly, we should be a united and diverse global music education community. We should be or could be a symbolic or cosmopolitan community. And we could likewise be an imagined community. But we are also a real community regarding being an online community. And the interesting question would be, in view of online technology, what is imagined and what is real? And it might be that in the future, we need to define in a new way what real community means and what imagined community means if we are in a global online space. In the online world, we can certainly learn a lot about each other, and we have to come to terms with the fact if knowing someone online would really count as knowing someone or only getting acquainted. These are questions we have to ask in the future, also in our daily teaching practices, and particularly regarding internationalization when we are connected globally. This means that we also have to be careful in a global online space and of course ask the questions I asked before regarding the framework. And it might be interesting if groups of researchers or individual researchers in different countries develop a set of questions helping us to better understand how the pandemic looks in different countries and what its impact on music education and internationalization is. The pandemic certainly challenges us, and we have painfully experienced how vulnerable we are. But at the same time, it gives us the opportunity to rethink who we are and who we want to be, and to encourage a broader dialogue in society about the meaning of the arts. Compared to sports or other activities, we have one huge advantage: the power of music, or to be more precise, the utopian power of music, which gives us hope and helps us to develop visions of music education. Now, new visions for a changed world. A few concluding thoughts. You see this quotation by bell hooks? The function of art is to do more than tell it like it is. It's to imagine what is possible. This quotation by Bell Hooks reminds us of the utopian power of the arts. The arts are clearly not so much about how the world is, but about how it could be. No matter how bad the state of the arts and arts education is, their intrinsic power can help us to overcome all problems through imagining alternatives. Certainly, we are not the first ones to experience crisis and to learn how vulnerable we are as human beings, as musicians, educators, or scholars. It might be one of arts and music's missions to express our anxiety and defeats, but also our triumphs and imaginations of a better world. What is often overlooked is the utopian power of the arts and music. This includes the utopian power of music education, particularly in view of global crisis. Utopian thinking is powerful and closely related to social change. It has not only aesthetic but also political and educational dimensions. Through our work, we educate and shape the next generation. As already mentioned, the pandemic is not only something which challenges us, but it is something which helps us to uncover our wishes and dreams regarding who we want to be. So the interesting question for all of us would be, how would you imagine the global music education community to be? For me, it would certainly be a united yet diverse global music education community, a symbolic, cosmopolitan, and also imagined community. Marie McCarthy uses the metaphor of global tapestry of music education to invoke a kind of international music education where everyone's voice is heard. Certainly, internationalization is ambivalent, as stated before, but something which can be shaped. My vision of globalizing music education in terms of a culturally sensitive internationalization of music education is certainly one option. The same concerns the pandemic. No matter how worse our lives might be, how marginalized music education might become, we still have power and can decide how to react to the situation, to recognize and use the utopian power of music we have at hand, and to use the new aspects of internationalization it uncovered. Utopian thinking has always played an important role in times of crisis, which we should likewise understand as times of opportunities for change. No matter how painful and dark they might sometimes look, we have the opportunity to shape music education and internationalization in a new way. This could be beneficial for music education in our own countries as well as music education globally. I would like to end with a quote which could give hope and inspire us to discover anew the utopian power of music and music education, and to dare imagine a different world while not being under pressure to reach every goal we imagine. Estelle Jorgensen writes, "A hopeful pedagogy can help to improve the situation, even if it does not reach the ideal." We need to imagine the global music education community in a new way, knowing that we are vulnerable, but that there is hope, even if we do not reach our goals completely. Let's start rethinking how internationalization should look like in times of COVID-19 and after it, and use the power of utopian thinking to imagine and to start realizing a united yet diverse global music education community in terms of globalizing music education. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Alexandra Kertz. So first of all, we have a good amount of questions here on the chat on Zoom, but also via our live streaming on YouTube, because there are over 20 people following also, added to the 150 people that are in this room. We have 20-something people on YouTube following this broadcast, and they have also posted some questions there. So our team is working currently on bringing some of those questions also to this chat. So if maybe in your chat, Dr. Kertz, you will see probably something around 8:38, which would be in your clock. There is the first question for Leonardo Borne, Dr. Leonardo Borne. I don't know if you want to address those questions that will be appearing on the chat. And if there's one question in Spanish, I can translate that for you. Maybe we can go by order. I mean, I don't know how much time we can have for this, but we will try to address as many as possible where it's kind of reasonable. But I mean, thank you again for your wonderful presentation on the behalf of everyone who attended this session.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Why don't you shoot, Hector, why don't you choose some questions?
Yes, well, I will start with the first one that is here from Dr. Leonardo Borne. He says, a reality of Latin America is that we are constantly struggling to implement music education through all basic education years in order to guarantee democratic access to music learning. Ahora le estoy leyendo ahí unas preguntas, las cuales también nuestra compañera Eileen va a estar poniendo los comentarios de la doctora en el chat. Y ya, bueno, ahora ya le he dicho la pregunta del doctor Borne, que dice que, bueno, dice que generalmente en Latinoamérica tenemos esta dificultad de implementar la educación musical a lo largo, digamos, de todos los años de formación y que es complicado poder garantizar el acceso democrático a la educación musical. So, yeah, Dr. Kertz, if you want to respond to that one.
I think it's important to realize that, as I said, we share similarities and differences globally. Going back to the different challenges and opportunities Marie McCarthy identifies in music education in public schools, I think internationalization also means that we are connected, that we have similar problems worldwide, but that also the situation in Latin America is certainly special. And that it's important that we feel that we are a global community, but that we also have the responsibility to speak up and to add our voice to the international discourse. So that not only, as I said at the beginning, the knowledge exchange is one-sided, but that we really understand and also contribute to the international discourse. And so this could mean, certainly we have similar challenges worldwide, but we have special issues, special problems in Latin America, and it would be wonderful if the global music education community could learn from that, and if that would be added, for instance, through research to the global discourse.
Yes, and he adds how internationalization might improve music education practice in basic schools then in the particular context of Latin America. How do you envision that could be for the particular context of basic school?
Yeah, I mean, educational transfer has been going on for quite some time. And if you take a look at the practical level, like I said, with the Off-Schulwerk, Kodai, or many other methods and methodologies, they have been exchanged. And if the educational transfer worked in a culturally sensitive way, then it was really like basic principles go to another country and are adapted and are changed through the local musical culture or through the national musical culture. And that could be a way, on a very practical level, to shape internationalizing music education and to utilize international music education to improve music education theory and practice, but also in the direction that the international music education community can learn from the way of educational transfer, for instance, is happening in countries in Latin America, and how certain approaches are changed and work in classrooms might improve, and to add this knowledge and experience again to the global discourse.
Perfect, thank you very much. In kind of this regard, Mercedes Alejandra Payan Ramirez, she just add that this is the Spanish community, like Spanish speaking community is not accept of this sort of rhetoric where and she addressed particularly the use of language, because sometimes, Spanish is used in different regions, right? Like in Europe, of course, in Spain and Latin America, sometimes the use of particular language also kind of brings to the question that there's some kind of so-called universal way to approach language that do not acknowledge the particularities of different kind of regions, right? Where we use the same language, but at the same time have their own way of expressing ideas. So she's commenting to that. And then moving to the next question, and I'm reading this as it is on the chat. It says, this question is about the reliability of standardized knowledge education. We have been taught by many schools of thought that factors that build our mental processes like language and learning are heavily affected by the environment and culture. You mentioned that your proposal aims to borrow and transfer experience from other places where they did already this work. How do we know that this interchange is indeed benefiting the scope of music education, and that the globalization of the education policies does not interfere or disputes with the cognitive and cultural models from each place?
That is an excellent question. You basically have to find ways, like I said, with the framework, to find questions or ways to assess or evaluate that. And I mean, there have been many examples for educational transfer which did not work. For instance, when music education was introduced in Japan, it was exactly the American model, and it did not work. And they needed to start in a new way, to find a Japanese way of music education. And so I would be very critical regarding this kind of cut and paste solutions regarding educational transfer, where just one model is brought to another country. And you really have to try to find ways for evaluation or assessment to figure out if it's a useful concept or not. The problem is that we are still caught up in neoliberal educational philosophies, and it's easier to try to assess students' learning outcomes than really to see in a much more holistic or broader perspective if things work in the classroom, even though student assessment might not exactly bring the results which would show if something is effective or not. But this would certainly be a task for future research, to develop the tools to be able to evaluate in different contexts that. And I would really like to argue for being culturally sensitive. Educational transfer is a difficult matter, and it has caused many problems in the past, and it was always a part of colonial powers to bring their music education and school systems to other countries. And we need to use the research and the knowledge and the information which, for instance, educational studies offer in this regard, to better understand when educational transfer can and has been successful and where we have to be careful.
Thank you. The aforementioned question was by Miguel Alejandro Ramos Vera. I forgot to mention who said that question. Sorry about that. And a second question for Dr. Leonardo Borne. He says, how to overcome the problems of Anglo-Saxon imposition in other contexts, validating this other knowledge as an important as, he's putting into quotes, other knowledge as an important as the hegemonic one?
Again, a good question. We would need to really think about what important knowledge for the global music education community is. And I mean, I'm from Germany and I spent 4 years in the United States. I personally experienced that not being American might, to a certain, and not being able to speak English properly, because I was a Latin major in high school. So this caused some problems when I came to the US and started to speak English. Of course, it's difficult, and in international music education to overcome these paradigms of Anglo-American music education will take years and maybe the next generation, but we have to start doing that. And we have to point out that research which is undertaken in some other part of the world is as much important as research undertaken, or which was undertaken in some city of the US. It's always the problem of generalization. And it's of course an interesting question if you can always generalize. If you did a very small investigation, we are always tempted to say that if somewhere in Anglo-American or Western European music education an investigation is done about the singing abilities of 2-year-old kids, this might be something of general knowledge, while when it would have happened in a country in Western Africa, it might be a different matter, but in fact it is not. Of course, we have to be context sensitive and to address that. But still, we have to be very careful about what would be global knowledge. And this will be, I think, a task for our generation and the next generation to raise these issues, to work as researchers, to show that there are many different kinds of knowledge and knowing and information and very different ways of approaching important information and of generating knowledge we need in music education.
Vamos a ir a una última pregunta. So we're going to go to our last question for this session. This comes from Dr. Rolando Ángel Alvarado from Chile. He says, the pandemic is one problem from internationalization and globalization, but we are also dealing with other issues such as Black Lives Matter, social disruption. For example, he said Ecuador or Chile, refugees, and so on. In your opinion, is music education prepared for including and internalizing those ways of thinking?
Again, a good question. The pandemic has indeed the tendency to absorb all other problems. It's just the only problem, but of course it's not. And even in Germany, the social inequalities are now much more obvious due to the pandemic. And I think music education can certainly play a role in terms of transformation and also social transformation. My next book will be about music education and social change. And I offer another concept which is based on utopian thinking and internationalization. And I think that music education can, of course, contribute to transforming society from a sociological perspective and a sociological foundation. And some ideas I presented in the last part of my presentation. So I think we are powerful, but we should try to figure out how powerful we are and how we can use the power we have without overextending what music education can actually do.
Thank you very much. We have more questions, but I guess for the sake of time, we know that it's late in Germany. Of course, you guys are ahead of time, but I think definitely it's like there will be a time, we hope that next year, to meet in person. And I guess all these questions and all this conversation that we hope to have, like with a coffee or perhaps other kind of drink, we will be able to talk about these issues in person. It will be great. I mean, this is just sort of like an introduction also to what we will hear next year from you, because you will be also invited as one of our key speakers there in Jalapa. So thank you again very much for your being willing to participate in this conference. We really appreciate that. And on the behalf of all the organizing team, all the people that have been participating in this conference, in this session, we are really looking forward to have you again. Now I'm going to say this in Spanish. Bueno, nuevamente le agradecemos mucho a la doctora Alexandra que nos haya pues compartido esta ponencia, esta conferencia, y ese es el inicio de una conversación pues más larga que habremos de tener el próximo año en persona, porque como ya se comentó al inicio de esta sesión, pues va a haber la posibilidad, está planteada y ella ha aceptado de ir a México el próximo año para ser una de las personas que son invitadas por parte del foro. Entonces, esta conversación va a seguir, ¿no? En un café, como siempre, es lo que a veces en esos tipos de formatos se pierde, ¿no? Terminando la conferencia, salir, platicar, dialogar, ¿no? Entonces, creo que habrá la oportunidad de continuar este diálogo por la cuestión de tiempo, también entendiendo que allá pues van más adelante, es un poquito más tarde para ella. Pues no continuaremos con las preguntas, porque desde luego hay muchísimas preguntas muy importantes que se quedan un poquito por cuestión de tiempo, pero pues esto va a seguir, seguimos trabajando, y no sé si le paso ahora a la maestra Julieta, a la maestra Risbe, el micrófono para algún otro comentario.
Muchas gracias. Vamos a ir cerrando nuestra primera sesión, nuestra conferencia. Avisos rápidamente, estamos poniendo un enlace, un cuestionario de Google para registrar la asistencia, está en el chat. por favor. Nuestra siguiente actividad comenzará a las 7 de la noche. Una disculpa con los inconvenientes del enlace. Esperemos que ya todos nos podamos conectar muy bien. Ahorita con lo que comente la maestra Julieta, si pueden prender su camarita para vernos, saludarnos un poquito, por ahí que nos saluden, por favor, para ver cuerpos moverse. Muchísimas gracias a la doctora Susi de Aguascalientes, al doctor Gerardo, muchas gracias, la presencia de todos. Agradecemos a la maestra Eileen. La traducción es un reto enorme, entonces agradecemos mucho tu participación, Eileen, a nuestros colegas, amigos, estudiantes, el equipo de Quintana Roo, Pati Ibison, a todos los ando viendo, ya saben que me gusta abrazar y saludar a todos, pero no puedo. El doctor Raúl, Ana Mora, nuestros alumnos, ya me callo que me emociono.
Bien, pues nos encontramos entonces a las 7 de la noche, es la misma liga, ahí tienen ya también el programa para que puedan ver los demás detalles y por ahora pues terminamos nuestra transmisión.
Muchísimas gracias y nos vemos en la noche con la presentación del documental del doctor Guillermo Rosabal Coto. Buen provecho, good night, thanks, Dr. Alexandra.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have
you.
a good day.
Gracias.
See you next year. See you next year.
Thank you. Bye. Muy bien.
Hola Miri, hola Lucecita, Anaí, muchos saludos. ¿Ya se fueron Arturo y Hey?
No sé.
Falta de tener la transmisión en YouTube.